Well, hey there, YouTube. Welcome to Thursday's edition of The Breakfast Club with Got That Funk. Thanks for joining me. I want to thank all the other contributors this week on The Breakfast Club. It's been a great week for videos so far on the channel, and there's a temptation on my part to discuss a lot of the stuff that was discussed by others. Because, that's kind of what we're here for, but it's also true that I want to discuss things with the members of the audience that they bring up to me from time to time. And earlier today on Twitter, I follow one of our viewers called Jack Burchill. Jack's also been an occasional guest host here on the Breakfast Club once or twice. And he was opining on Twitter about free will. And the concept of free will is one that I've battled with off and on pretty much ever since I was a little boy. Because once I found out that there was even a controversy about free will, I mean, when I was a kid, obviously, I just assumed that free will was just a natural state of affairs. We're all in charge of our own mind, and so therefore free will exists, right? Because I decide what I do and what I don't do. And it feels very much when I make those decisions, most of the time anyway, that I'm making a choice based on my free will. That's how it feels. And it still feels like free will, but I think it's a perfectly fair question to ask. Is it really free, or how free is it? I've over the years, I've changed my position back and forth on whether or not free will can exist or does exist or whatever. And now I kind of ride the fence, if that's even possible in this kind of discussion. But let me tell you a little bit about what Jack Burchill said in his tweet. He was implying that logically there's only two possibilities when you regard the concept of free will. Either free will exists and there is an author to your thoughts, and that author must therefore also have an author, and so on. So that's an infinite regress, and therefore free will can't exist. The other alternative that Jack suggested was that everything that you do and everything that you think is the result of a reaction to something that's happened before, something that you've thought before, that kind of thing. And he thinks that those are the sort of only two possibilities, and in both scenarios, it doesn't leave much room for thinking that your will is really free. Now, I actually think there's other ways to look at it beyond just those two possibilities. The thing about the author needing an author, and so on with an infinite regress, I don't even subscribe to that as even really a plausible possibility. I think either your will is you have well, I'm going to cut to the chase, because otherwise I'm going to bog the video down with a whole bunch of meaningless drivel and idle speculation. Anyway, which is what this is anyway, granted, but it's just my opinion, right? It's easy to think that you have free will because, as I said a moment ago, you have the sensation of having a free will. But it's easy to really pick it apart. Like, for example, if you really had a free will, you could just decide to be happy. No matter what was happening in your life, you could just decide to be happy. Or if you really had a free will, you could just decide to be in love. You could just decide to, right? And then clearly neither of those are the case. I mean, if you really had a free will, you could decide that your broken leg doesn't hurt, right? So I think with those examples, it becomes pretty obvious that your will isn't as free as the term free will implies. However, I don't think that those are necessarily the best examples. When Jack said about, everything that you think is a reaction to something that's happened and something that you've thought or felt or done before, it's difficult to disagree with that on a lot of levels. And I've made this argument on my own channel years ago about free will, where, an awful lot of how you respond to even the same sort of stimulus would depend on the circumstances involved. For example, I'm going to use the same example I used in that video. Let's just say you're standing in line at a grocery store and someone behind you steps on your foot. Now, the most passive thing you could do is to not respond at all, just to completely ignore it, pretend it didn't happen, don't even look around, don't physically or verbally acknowledge it in any way. That's the most passive thing you could do. The second most passive thing you could do, I suppose, is just like apologize to the person because obviously you were in their way or they wouldn't have stepped on your foot. That's pretty passive, isn't it? But that's the kind of thing an English person might do, for example. That's very British. You know, someone steps on your foot and you apologize to them. Another thing you could do, you know, you could flash them a look and maybe hope that they apologize to you, or you could flash them a dirty look, just let them know that they don't need to apologize and, you know, hey, watch out where you're going. Or you could even say, hey, watch out where you're going. Or you could turn around and punch them in the chops. You could even kill them. You could do any or all of those things. Not all of, but you could do any one of those things. And how you make the decision isn't necessarily free. For example, someone steps on your foot and you decide to turn around. If that person is 5 foot tall, 79-year-old gran who, you know, is got a walking stick and so forth, you're not likely to give her any grief. On the other hand, if it's, you know, some 12-year-old punk and you had the impression that they did it on purpose, you might tell them off or make some kind of a remark or at least ask for an apology or something. On the other hand, if it's a fellow who's like, you know, 6'10" and weighs 280, are you going to say anything at all? If it's a really pretty woman or someone that you find attractive, I should say, that's what I find attractive, shouldn't go there. Basically, if it's someone you find attractive, your response is going to be different yet again. So the circumstance your response isn't necessarily free. It's the same infraction, but the circumstance will determine how you respond. Not just the circumstance, but also past circumstances. For example, if you've been having a bad day that day, it will impact how you respond. If you've had people stepping on your feet all your life, and this is just another example of some idiot stepping on your foot, that will have an impact on how you respond. You see what I mean? So your will isn't necessarily as free as we might like to think. So having said that, it would sound like I'm about to agree with Jack that free will doesn't really exist, but I'm not going to agree with that. Because free will, you know, part of free will is free thought. And I absolutely think that free thought exists. If it didn't, no one would ever have an original idea. Ever. You know, we would still be, you know, living an agrarian life. If we could even live that, because you couldn't have an original idea to plant the seeds and so forth. You know what I mean? I mean, free will implies free thought. And free thought, to me, definitely exists. It's demonstrable, you know. Anytime I create a work of art, it's a completely sort of reaction from me. I get a creative impulse and I don't even know where it's coming from or what it's doing or necessarily, a lot of the times when I'm painting especially, I don't have a clue what the end result's going to look like until I get there. And it's like, it is a completely free expression of the moment. Maybe it has something to do with the music I'm listening to, maybe it doesn't, but it's a creative process. And I think things like creative art or making love or things like, you know, sports activities or anything that requires an awful lot of concentration even, can require free thought. You get into a zone where you are very much in the driver's seat of your brain, and it's not necessarily got anything to do with how you responded to anything else that's happened before. I mean, it may do, but it also may not do. And I particularly think that's true when it comes to creativity, and that's not just artistic creativity. That's also things like, you know, inventions and so forth. But I would agree, you know, for sure that an awful lot of the things we think and the things that we do are more of a reaction than an action. I'd say the majority of things fall into that category, but I absolutely don't think it's mutually exclusive. I don't think that you can say that free will doesn't exist just because most of the things that you think and do can be traced back to a reaction to some other sort of, you know, impetus. Free thought, spontaneous ideas, creativity definitely exist. And from my point of view, therefore, free will must exist. You must, at some level, to some degree, have some capability over controlling your own thoughts. Now, I especially think this is true because it's been a long time since I was really dedicated into meditation, but meditation, getting into a deep state of meditation, it very much requires free will. It requires, putting yourself in the driver's seat, very much so, and taking control of your thoughts. And that doesn't spontaneously happen. That's a matter of effort, but the effort itself becomes less and less the more practice you get, and so forth. So yeah, I definitely think free will exists, and I don't think you have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I also think that most of our thinking is programmed, whether we like to admit it or not, but not all of it. So that's where I come down in this issue. What about you? Do you think free will even exists? Do you think that free will only exists, and do you reject the premise that everything that you think is a reaction to something else? I'd really like to explore your thinking on this subject, so let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I don't know, I think I've got Brock Lawley again for a guest host video on tomorrow's Breakfast Club, and then we should have JJ Talks back on Saturday. Fingers crossed. Until next time, thanks for watching. Peace.